In this video, I'm reviewing 3 controversial hands from my recent 200NL session. I used GTO Genesis for all my analysis, comparing how I played the hand to how I should be playing in theory. Make sure to stay tuned until the end and think about how you would be playing each hand differently. The first hand, I have 6-5 suited in the cutoff and get 3-bet from the small blind. Facing a 3-bet from the small blind, 6-5 suited is an indifferent continue. The solver doesn't mind continuing with this suited connector more frequently because it has little overlap with the small blind's 3-betting range and can play well on lower connected boards. The flop comes 10-6-4 rainbow. Facing a check on the flop, I choose to bet 25% pot. GTO Genesis shows that my hand is betting 25% pot here around half the time, and it's the only sizing used by my entire range. I'm allowed to bet any of the hands in my range for the 25% pot sizing, but I'm betting my pairs with the main goal of folding out overcards with equity against my hand. I end up putting in the 25% pot bet and then get check raised. Facing a check raise, my hand is a clear continue. Villain still has check raise bluffs with overcards that have a backdoor flush draw and some 4x hands. Additionally, I have equity to improve on turns giving me trips or 2-pair if I'm behind a strong 10 or an overpair. I do end up putting in the call, and the turn is the ace of diamonds. Facing b25 on the turn, I have more of a real decision to make. In theory, my hand is a pure continue facing a b25. However, if I go into strategy and show the EV as well, we can see my hand is getting closer to a 0 EV continue. Meaning that if my opponent is not finding enough bluffs, my continue, even though it's supposed to be plus EV in theory, could be a bad call in practice. This would mean that against an opponent who's not finding bluff raises with hands like king-queen suited or queen-jack suited on the flop, an argument could be made for folding my hand right now. However, against a reg finding those bluffs, I do think I have to put in the call. The river is the queen of diamonds and villain checks it over to me. Before taking a closer look at my strategy, I can automatically say that this hand effectively never wins at showdown. Additionally, there are 60 big blinds left in my stack and a pot of around 90 big blinds. So if I do bluff jam, it needs to work around 40% of the time. Now, looking at my hand strategy, we can see that it is a pure jam. Villain takes this exact line with hands like queen-jack suited, king-queen suited, pocket kings, and 10x hands like king 10 suited and jack 10 suited that should be folding most of the time when facing a river jam. If we take a look at villain's strategy facing an all-in, we can see that most of the hands I just mentioned are folding at a very high frequency. However, a hand like king queen suited is actually typically supposed to be putting in the call. However, I think that this spot is underbluffed in practice, so all the hands that I mentioned will likely be putting in the fold at almost 100% frequency, even a hand like king-queen suited, unless villain thinks that I am finding all the bluffs. With that in mind, I do shove my hand and end up getting called by ace-4 suited. While I did lose this hand, villain having ace-4 suited shows that he is finding the check-raise bluffs on the flop and would likely also have those weaker single pair hands that would fold to my river jam. The second hand, I have pocket eights in the hijack, get cold called by the cutoff, and then the button squeezes. I end up putting in the call, and we go to a flop of 9-7-9 rainbow. I check it over to my opponent, and he ends up checking it back. If we take a look at villain's flop strategy, we see that he's supposed to be using a b75 with about 60% of his range in this spot. Additionally, I think villain is finding an adequate amount of bluffs. Meaning I expect him to be using a b75 with a king high or queen high hand very often. This leads me to think that when he puts in a check, he is much more weighted towards hands that have decent showdown value, mainly ace king through ace 10. In general, people overcheck showdown value and bet their made hands too often. Additionally, this specific player is more aggressive. This leads me to think that when villain checks, he is much more weighted towards a showdown value hand, like ace-king through ace-10, because he's going to be betting his overpairs an adequate amount compared to theory, but he will also be finding those king-high and queen-high bluffs with hands like king-queen suited or queen-jack suited. In general, people will check their showdown value too often, which results in them having a different range compared to theory on later streets. Getting back to the hand, the turn is a king of clubs and I check it over to villain. villain ends up betting 75% pot, saying that he checked the king on the flop and is now improved to top pair. Facing a b75 on the turn, pocket eights is indifferent between calling and folding. But that's assuming villain is playing according to GTO strategy. If we assume that our opponent is checking too many of those strong ace-x hands on the flop, while he does have combos of ace-king, he also has too many combos of those other strong ace-x hands like ace-queen through ace-10. Additionally, villain should also have standard turn bluffs such as ace-5 suited and ace-4 suited that picked up a club draw. Since we assume that villain has too many of those unpaired hands compared to theory, my indifferent pocket eights call turns into a plus EV call. For that reason, I do put in a call in-game. The river is a 9 of clubs, completing the flush, but also turning any paired hand into a full house. I check it over to villain and face a b75. In theory, my hand is still indifferent between calling and folding. The 9 on the river means that no additional hands beat me, as I was already behind 9x hands, and now my full house beats any flush. If we called on the turn with pocket eights, because villain was perceived to have too many bluffs in his range after checking flop, the river doesn't improve any of his bluffs. For that reason, pocket eights should also be a plus EV call on the river. The only way that pocket eights becomes a minus EV bluff catcher on the river is if villain is a type of player to bluff on the turn and then give up on the river too often. However, I do not think this is the case, and eventually end up putting in the call in-game. Fortunately, villain did have one of those strong ace-x hands and confirmed that he would be following through on the river with his bluffs. The last hand, I have pocket 10s in the small blind and get 3-bet from the big blind. If we were 100 big blinds deep, I would always be 4-betting pocket 10s. But being 150 big blinds deep, I'm allowed to call or 4-bet. The flop comes ace of diamonds, 7 of spades, 5 of diamonds. I check it over to villain and face a b25. Taking a look at villain's range after 3-betting, we can see that he has plenty of marginal hands like king 7 offsuit, queen 9 offsuit, and all of the suited connectors. This is because villain will be 3-betting a very polar range facing my small blind open, since I have such a wide small blind opening range. Since villain's range is so wide, when facing a b25, 10s is a clear-cut call. On top of that, if we take a look at the EV of calling pocket 10s, we can see that 10s with a diamond is around 4 big blinds of EV when making the call. I do put in the call, and the turn is a 3 of clubs. I check it over to villain, and he checks back. When villain checks back on the turn, I take out almost all the strongest hands from his range. I always expect villain to continue barreling a hand like ace-queen, ace-king, or any of the 2-pair combinations he has. I still have plenty of worse ace-x and diamond flush draws in my range that villain will want to get value from. I would also expect villain to continue bluffing most of his suited connector diamond draws, as he can put a lot of pressure on my single pair hands. The river is the queen of diamonds. This isn't a great card for my hand because villain should have some of those junky offsuit queen x hands and low suited queens that now beat me. I check it over to villain and face a 2/3 pot bet. Taking a look at villain's strategy, we can see that he can use all the different bet sizes. I think that in practice, people would typically use somewhere between a b50 and b75, and very rarely a jam. When villain uses the b66 size, he's basically saying that he has a hand like ace-10 or better, but typically not a nutted hand like a flush or a straight. For that reason, facing a b75 on the river, 10s with the diamond is meant to be a bluff jam. 10s with a diamond makes a good all-in bluff, as it blocks flushes with the 10 of diamonds that villain might have decided to put in their b75 category to protect the slightly smaller bet size with a nutted hand. Additionally, having the 10 of diamonds myself allows me to more credibly rep a flush, as villain can't have that 10 of diamonds blocker that makes it less likely I have a flush on the river. However, in practice, I don't expect villain to often be using this b66 size with a flush. If we go back to all the hands that villain should be betting on the river, we can see that hands like ace-4 offsuit and ace-2 offsuit are also meant to be checking most of the time. This is because I can still have stronger ace-x in my range, so betting a hand like ace-4 or ace-2 for 66 or 75% pot would be an overplay. For the same reason, I never expect a junky queen like queen-9 offsuit to be putting in a b66 on the river. In game, I considered that I had two 10s, meaning that I'm blocking half the ace-10 combos. And since I always expect villain to continue barreling a hand like ace-king or ace-queen on the turn, I expected this was either a hand like ace-jack, one of the remaining ace-10 combos, or a bluff. Since villain has so many of these junky 3-bet hands, I also expect that villain will have plenty of bluffs to choose from, and arrives on this river with so many weak hands that it's hard not to overbluff this spot. For that reason, instead of jamming my hand, I end up just putting in the call, and get shown the king 6 offsuit. Looking back at villain's strategy, while this might look like a complete airball, villain does have king 6 offsuit hands that want to put in the b75 as a bluff on the river. Additionally, most players would overfold the spot with their bluff catchers, likely making this a profitable bluff against population. If you enjoyed this hand review and want to get your own free post-flop analysis every day, make sure to check out GTO Genesis using the link in the description. Make sure to like, subscribe, and let me know which hands you found interesting in the comments. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you next video.